Thanks for having me.
Do you think Alex Smith is dog poop as Les does?
Somewhere above dog poop anyway, and maybe a little somewhere in between greatness and dog poop. I think would be Alex.
So halfway in between would be. You didn't know you'd come on and have to defend or defame Alex
He can't come back. He can't throw downfield. I mean, come on. He doesn't win anything.
Let's get to the Vikings.
All right, let's get to the Vikings.
They're
Sorry,
somewhere
Tim.
between dog poop and greatness, too, to be honest.
Hey, Tim, I
I
want to start with something, an aspect of the Vikings team that not a lot of people talk about, and that's the defense. I believe they're number 2 when it comes to quarterback pressures in this league. They had 4 sacks against San Diego this last weekend, and they hit Phillip Rivers another 8 times. So they actually got to Phillip Rivers 12 times in that game. Is Everson Giffen the best pass rusher nobody's talking about, and how good is that Vikings pass rush?
Yeah, I mean, if nobody's talking about him, then he probably is the best that nobody's talking about. There is a reason that the Vikings just said, Jared Allen, go ahead, go to the Bears or go wherever in free agency. They knew what they had in Everson Griffin, so that immediately gave them the confidence to depart from Jared Allen. But I would argue that the best player on the Vikings defense is actually Anthony Barr. He's the guy that's coming on the pressures, on the blitzes. He's also doing it in coverage as well. So they have a couple of good pass rushers on that defense.
Tim, are you in prison? That is the worst background we've ever had on Skype, but where are you?
This is the wonderful world of Vikings media room here. So
tell them to get a painting or a poster of the team or something.
Hey, there's a reason that they're moving into a new facility in a couple of years.
Tim, let me just get straight to it. How do the Vikings beat the Broncos this week?
You know, typically I think everybody thinks of the Broncos and they think Peyton Manning and the great offenses, but that shouldn't necessarily scare Vikings fans as much as that Broncos defense. That to me is going to be the big concern. How does the Vikings offense, especially that offensive line, protect Teddy Bridgewater enough to get him comfortable? I think that the only way that the Vikings can beat the Broncos, especially in Denver, is to get some sort of rhythm going for Bridgewater, and I think that's going to be a tall task.
Well, see, that's interesting. If I can just follow up on that I thought we haven't really seen, even though Jamal Charles, we would put in a category with Adrian Peterson, based on Peterson's comeback the last 2 games and really played extremely well, 134 yards, 125 or something like that. It would seem to me that nobody's been able to get a running game going against the Broncos, that if the Vikings came in here and ran the ball successfully for, say, 200 yards, that they could keep the game close and possibly beat the Broncos.
Well, I don't think that there's any question that's what they want to do. They went into the Monday night opener against San Francisco, and it was surprising, their game plan. They didn't use Peterson early. They didn't use him often enough, and that's one of the reasons that they got beaten that game. Then they come back, and they've established Peterson. He's leading the NFL in rushing yards right now after 3 games. So you're right that that's got to be part of it. But Bridgewater has really struggled to look comfortable in 2 out of the 3 games so far this year. And I think they're going to need to work in the play action with Peterson and find ways to keep the Broncos guessing what's coming their way.
I think it's 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions, or the other way around for Bridgewater.
Yeah. Well, and beyond that, he hasn't looked accurate early in games. He's looked uncomfortable, like he's not sure that he's going to get the protection. And I think that was understandable going into the season opener, because that offensive line with the Vikings had a lot of questions. They were missing their center, their right tackle. But ultimately, the offensive line has only given up 1 sack to Bridgewater in the last 2 games. And so he's got to start to feel comfortable. And I find it interesting that this year he doesn't look comfortable. Last year, in the second half of the season, when there were more questions about the offensive line, it didn't seem to faze him. So I'm not sure what's going on with him right now.
Tim, I'm trying to figure him out. I can't tell how good he is or how good he's going to be. What do your eyeballs tell you?
Well, After last year, you looked at him and you went, nothing phases this guy. He's a rookie. He was thrown into the NFL in a starting position in his third game, and he handled it well. He had some struggles early on with interceptions, with sacks, but he got over those quickly, and the second half of the season looked really strong. This year, I don't know exactly what's going on with him. There are times where he looks comfortable, and there are times where he goes 2 or 3 drives, and he doesn't look like the same guy that we saw at the second half of last year.
Well, is it totally on him? I mean, we're not hearing anything about the wide receivers, the tight end at the Vikings. Talk to us. I hate that question.
They gave him a lot of weapons in the offseason.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But
we're not hearing anything about the receiving core with the Vikings.
Yeah, well, Mike Wallace came in, and he was supposed to be this guy that's going to stretch the field.
Oh, yeah, but he was supposed to do that in Miami, too, and he didn't either.
There have been opportunities for him when he's been open, and Bridgewater either hasn't seen him. In the second game of the year, Bridgewater put a pass beautifully onto Wallace in the end zone, and Wallace didn't catch it. You could argue that there should have been pass interference called, but that was just another example of the deep passing game still having to develop here. Kyle Rudolph, I think, is, as long as he's healthy, I think he's one of the better tight ends, probably around that top 5 range in the NFL. And they're looking at him in the red zone quite often. Bridgewater's had some success there. But the opposite side, Charles Johnson had a good final stretch last year, and he hasn't been quite the same guy this year.
How much of it has to do with the fact they are back to relying on Adrian Peterson a whole lot? And Bridgewater hasn't had to do a lot. And does AP, I know the numbers are great, but does AP look like the AP of a couple years ago?
Well, it's interesting. The first game of the season, I would have said no. The offensive line didn't look like they could block, couldn't do anything for him. Then these last 2 games, they've had a bit of a switch because they started out with Norv Turner's offense, Teddy Bridgewater in the shotgun often. Last week against the Chargers, every single time they handed off the football, Bridgewater was under center. So that was a bit of a shift, and it could also be a bit of a tell, you could argue, as to whether the Vikings are going to run or pass. But I think that's one of the reasons that Peterson has looked better is because he's used to getting the handoff when he's 7 yards deep, having some time before he gets the ball to see how things are developing. So I'm going to be curious to see if this offense turns into more of Bridgewater under center than in the shotgun, which he started out at the beginning of this year.
Sounds like you're in Denver.
Exactly.
That's the same discussion here. Well, let's get to another serious question. Detroit is, since we're on a theme here, Detroit proves to be dog poop. The Chicago Bears are the worst dog poop in the league. You got to tell the people of Minnesota, you're the last hope in that division. Is there any chance that the Vikings can possibly catch Green Bay or at least be in the hunt for a playoff spot?
There's one chance, and that's if Aaron Rodgers is hurt in the second half of the season, because right now they look like the Green Bay passing attack is almost unstoppable. And, the Vikings wouldn't be able to keep up with that. But I think that the Vikings can at least challenge for a wild card spot in the NFC. But right now, the way that the Packers are playing and that thing is clicking on offense, it's going to be awfully tough for them to catch the Packers.
Well, you should be able to get meaning the Vikings, not you, but the Vikings should be able to get well in that division if they're not playing the Packers. So that would seem to indicate that the Vikings going into the season, you know this better than we do, was sort of the soup du jour that people are going, oh, the Vikings, oh, that's a team you got to watch out for. And yes, they're playing okay, and Peterson is playing better than I think people thought he would coming back, but you can't lose a game other than to the Packers in the division, and that would give the Vikings an opportunity to get in the playoffs, it seems, from my vantage point.
Yeah, it would. Last year it was surprising because I thought that the Vikings last year could have been on par with Chicago and Detroit, and they weren't. They ended up going 1-5 in the division. This year, they already beat Detroit. They should beat Chicago. They should beat Detroit again. The real question is, can they beat the Packers even when the Vikings are at home? And it's going to be a tough task. I'll say this, though. The one thing about the Vikings that's vastly improved over the last couple of years since Mike Zimmer's come in. Their pass defense has been far better than it's been in the last decade. And I put that basically on Zimmer and getting in some more talent at cornerback.
Hey, Tim, appreciate your time. We're going to want to read about the Vikings this week. So what's your Twitter handle?
Twitter handle is @VikingUpdate, and it's on the web, vikingupdate.com.
All right,
and the other thing is, good luck on getting that stadium. I've been waiting for a stadium in Minneapolis, and ever since I've been started covering football, and playing in a baseball stadium for years, and playing in that garbage dome stadium, and now I watched the game the other day, and I don't care, but there are no suites there for people who want to spend some money. So I can't wait for the new stadium. I assume that's true for you too.
It's going to be spectacular. I've taken a couple of tours of this thing, and they've got the translucent roof up there that covers 60% of it. It's going to have sort of an outdoor feel without being outdoors, because there are so many windows and translucent opportunities here that it's going to be quite the stadium.
Tim, appreciate your time, and we'll see you this weekend.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Tim
Get a poster
Yotter of
behind you.
VikingsUpdate.com. And all of our live guests are brought to you by Papa John's. Better and